My name is Drew Waldron, and I am on with Harvard professor, CNN senior national security analyst, and former assistant secretary at the DHS, Juliette Kayyem. Juliette, it's great to sit down with you.
It's great to see you, Drew.
Absolutely. I'm really excited to get into this conversation
Yeah.
about your career. And the first thing I want to ask is that your career is so extremely layered. You have a
Yes.
multitude of titles. How do you describe your
Oh,
career to those who first learn about your work?
yes. I like to say I've had one career in many jobs, but basically my world is the world of risk reduction. It's a world of crisis and disaster management, and I do it in a variety of fields. I'm a faculty member at Harvard's Kennedy School. I'm on air with CNN and a contributor to The Atlantic. I do a lot of private consulting and have served in government, 2 federal stints and 1 state stint, helping minimize risk and prepare institutions and communities and even people for the disruptions that we seem to encounter every single day. So in that way, they're all the same job.
Absolutely. And a lot of that knowledge is at the forefront of your latest book, which is
Yeah.
titled The Devil Never Sleeps: Learning to Live in an Age of Disasters. Very, very intimidating title, by the way.
I try to make it user friendly, but yes, it has some pictures too. But look, I mean, part of my job is to provide lessons and tools and skills to my audiences to give them agency and a sense of power over a world that can seem so unmanageable. And I sort of view that as my role. I'm not throw my hands up and say everything is going to heck in a handbasket. I try to empower people. And part of that empowerment is recognizing that these disruptions will occur.
Absolutely. And your audiences have such a variety to them, but with your experience in the public sector, media sector, academic
Yeah.
sector, private sector, you have the ability to talk to a variety of
Yeah.
industries, a variety of walks of life. What lessons do you hope that leaders take away
Yeah.
from your book and your talks?
Yes, it is an interesting part of my work is that I essentially call myself an all hazards expert. In other words, it could be cyber, climate change, or a climate disruption, or a terror attack, or a pandemic. And in many ways, each of these disruptions and how we respond to them are similar. And so what I try to do is provide what I would call the connective tissue across all these different things that can seem, not related, and sort of how can we take a step back and see, okay, what are the common tools that we would want? Situational awareness, ability to stop cascading losses, all the things that I get into in the speeches and my work. I think if there were a bumper sticker about how I live my life and what I try to teach these various audiences is that we have to learn to fail safer. And that is essentially anticipate the disruptions, however you define them, and then be ready to respond so that the consequences are, less bad than they might otherwise have been.
You just said the phrase fail safer, and I know
Yes.
that is a phrase that appears across all of your work. What
Yeah.
do you mean by fail safer? And what do you hope people take away from that mantra?
Look, I'm a mother of 3 kids. I live in our society. I want bad things not to happen, right? As in other words,
Good
that
stand.
would be ideal, right? And in disaster management, we call that sort of left of boom. Can we stay away from the bad thing? But over 20 years in this field, after 20 years in this field, I started to think about, well, what is success, right? Most people think, well, if the bad thing didn't happen, that's successful. But really, there are ways in which, even when the bad thing happens, right, the devil, right, as I call it in the book, comes, there are ways to measure success in how we prepare, respond, adapt, and rebuild after that disruption. And so that's what I mean by fail safer. Yes, I would like bad things not to happen. As I said, I also view our capacity to recognize that failure could come and to respond in real time is also a measure of success. And that's what I try to provide to various audiences, what those tools and lessons are.
In the explanation of your mantra, you did mention your role as a mother of 3.
Yes.
You have another book called Security
Yes.
Mom, which is an examination of the intersectionality in your life as a security and crisis expert, as
Right.
well as mother of 3, and where those lines cross.
Yeah.
You've even developed a keynote based on that book.
Yes.
What was it that initially made you see the connections between those 2 lives?
So part of it was just having time to reflect once I was out of government. What was I trying to do in government? And anyone who's a parent knows, what you're trying to do is minimize the risk to your family while still being a family, still being part of the world, still doing the things that you want to do. People often ask me, because I was involved with Boston Marathon security, well, is the Boston Marathon after the terror attacks, is it safe? I go, I don't do safe. Like, no, it's not safe, because we want to be out in the world. We want to do things. We want to go out with our kids. You want your kids, as they get older, to ride bikes and drive cars and all the things that worry us. So what you can do is empower your children to recognize vulnerabilities, to be, aware of threats, and then how best to respond. So I sort of emerged the home and the homeland in that book. And I should say, fast forward a decade later, the opening to the next mainstream book, The Devil Never Sleeps, is really about my home. I wrote that book during COVID. I was home with the kids. I live in where I am now, which is the CNN studio in my home. I live in this old rambling home in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And the story is long, so I'll truncate it. But I learned that 99 years before, in 1919, there was another family who lived in this home who lost a daughter to the Spanish flu in this home, the home I'm talking to you right now from. And that sort of connection, right? That idea that, we always think that everything's so new and scary, actually was a way for me to think about, ultimately, why do I do what I do? It's to protect, essentially, our home and what we care about the most. And I think that drives me in my personal life, as well as in my public platforms.
That's an incredible connection.
Yeah.
Just the fact that 100 years apart, you're dealing with a very similar crisis. Even though all that time has passed, it's still evolved in some way. And I wanted to ask you, especially in the last 2 years, we have seen rapid AI development.
Yeah.
How do you think that rapid AI development will impact the world of crisis?
So it's such a great question. So look, it is, well, what do you think of AI? It's like, AI is just a tool. Like, let's just first put it in perspective. All the creators of AI who throw up their hands and say, oh my God, we have no control over this. That's like, okay, everyone take a deep breath. And part of my job is to translate scary things. It is a tool. That tool can be used for good or evil. I view it as sort of nuclear, right? I mean, in other words, it can be used for good, for clean energy, or evil. You can't just sort of say it's all bad. First, it increases the risks. It increases what we would call the threat environment for a variety of reasons. I mean, it's just the connectivity, the ability to control things, the ability to steal personal information, the ability to learn quickly. If you're a threat, to learn quickly creates vulnerabilities in institutions that didn't face those before. So even if you think about elections, right, we're starting to see sort of the first AI threats in elections, which includes pretending that you're a candidate and having your voters vote a certain way. And we would later learn, that was just an AI generated voice. So I recognize that the threats are changing. We also should view AI as giving us more capacity to be able to prepare for and adapt to those threats. AI is going to be wonderful and is wonderful in terms of assessing what the risk environment is something coming from afar, or supply chains disrupted, is something not going right somewhere, is you think about what we call in disaster and crisis management situational awareness, our ability to understand what's going on in real time so we can deploy resources or fix something that has gone bad. All of that will also bring benefits to how I think about this world. And I think one of the overarching concerns, though, for anyone, it's not just me, it's anyone in any space, is, of course, it's AI's ability to change reality and what we're seeing and what we believe in the real world. And that's something that we constantly have to check. So if the voice isn't actually the voice, or the earthquake isn't actually the earthquake, or the whatever threat you're thinking of isn't actually that, look, we have to get better about understanding, identifying, and limiting the potential for things like disinformation and misinformation, which will play out in social media and other networks.
You brought up a good point that I'd like to get back to, and that's the idea of sensationalism. And this doesn't have to be within the context of AI, but in that AI context, you said that every headline is, oh, it's the end of the world. It's this crazy, unbelievable thing. And how do you step back and say it's just a tool? And again, it doesn't have to be in the context of AI. Any sensationalized subject.
Right.
Crisis management personality, how do you deal
So I start every speech, every time I teach my crisis management course with a crisis is different. And people have to understand the definition of it because we have a tendency to view everything as a crisis, right? There's the fentanyl crisis and the border crisis and whatever. And we can lose our heads and think things are worse than they are, or that we can't manage them because we've given them this title. So I'll get wonky for a second. Look, a crisis has three criteria. In my speeches, I talk about it. It is a disruption to standard operating procedure, to an institution, a community, whatever else, that may have been anticipated, but its exact moment is unknown. In other words, it's a surprise. And third, and most importantly, our capacity to respond is limited in time. So when I talk to institutions and leaders in both the public and private sector, it's that third piece, that idea of the short runway that has to motivate us to be ready for essentially the crash landing. And look, when you have a short runway, you only have two options: be ready for the crash or try to extend the runway. And so I have a variety of ways for institutions and people to think about that. How do you want to be ready? What do you want in place? What's your team look like? What's your architecture, your response architecture? What's your situational awareness? What are you going to want to know at that moment of the landing? And when I talk about extending the runway, I talk about well-known tools in disaster management, things like, having redundancies, stopping the bleed or stopping the cascading losses, and being able to adapt in real time. Look, these are all knowable skills. We know them now, and we just have to be willing to view that as now part of our standard operating procedure. So it's a great question because it's that runway piece, that time piece that makes what I do different than, say, other public policy problems that we confront as a society or as institutions all the time.
Absolutely. Just to jump topics for a little bit. So you are calling me from your CNN studio where you serve as
Hello, people will recognize that. What's commonly known online as Juliette's map room. These are old maps that now appear on air all the time.
That's excellent. You recently shared with me that you are often called immediately to CNN to address whatever needs to be addressed with immediacy. And I wanted to ask, what is the last segment where you were woken up in the middle of the night?
Yeah, so I've been on with CNN a long while. I have other platforms in writing and radio, and I love all of them. They're all different. CNN, who anyone watches it, very focused on breaking news, and I'm one of their breaking news people. So it would have been last Thursday. So that would have been like February 21st, 2024. I'm asleep. I do sleep with my phone on, just given the nature of my job and some of my consulting. And I have 3 kids. So yes, I sleep with my phone on, and I get a call, and literally it's like at 5:40, and they're like, when can you be ready? Okay, that takes a little while. When can you be ready? It's about AT&T. Okay, well, of course, I have no idea what's happening with AT&T. And because my texts are down, I can't figure out what was going on. People are texting me the news and I don't know what it is. So I have to get prepared. And I do that through all sorts of means. I have to be very careful because I can't get it wrong on air. And I think people have come to respect my voice on CNN as I really don't jump to conclusions. I am an analyst willing to say, we don't know yet. Here's the range of possibilities. I think that's important. It's easy to scare people, as I say, but that's not my role. The AT&T national sort of dark out or blackout will be viewed as a bigger deal in time than maybe the fact that they were able to get back online. First of all, national blackouts are really rare. I mean, we have systems of critical infrastructure like telecoms that are layered defenses and they're bifurcated. And we try to have in my world what we call, or we try to avoid what we call in my world, single points of failure. So that as any institution that I advise, I say, like, don't have that one thing that if it goes out, the floor falls out. So a national blackout is really rare, but there's a piece of it that it was of particular interest was, of course, our ability for public safety entities to communicate with each other. I should add, by the end of the day, if you want me to get outraged at a sophisticated corporation, you would have seen it on TV. Part of what I try to show corporations and leadership is that often the legal advice is not very good. They tend to shut up. They don't want to say anything. They're not speaking to their employees and their customers and their licensees. And it took AT&T a long time to do anything more than have like a little blurb on their website to reach out and explain what's happening, because people were really nervous. I mean, was this a cyber attack? Was this a space attack? And this is a major platform that we had become dependent on. So that would be my advice is, while the lawyers are telling you one thing, think about as a customer or an employee, what would you want to hear from your leadership? And at that stage, we needed to hear that they didn't think that a nefarious actor got into their system.
It's a scary thought, right?
Yeah. And look, and even though, as I said to you, I sort of live in the world of less bad, right? So I'm going to assume that something bad is happening. I'm going to measure success by more or less bad. Look, I mean, if you can say to your customers immediately, we have some idea what it is, maybe they didn't have an exact idea, and we don't believe it to be a cyber attack, that calms everyone. Also, it calms the market. AT&T suffered a big stock market loss that day because no one knew what it was. Did a major telecom company get hacked? So it's very important to communicate not only what you think it is, but also that you have high confidence that it isn't worse.
Absolutely. Very, very well said. Juliette, I think we only have time for about one more question.
Okay, great.
Been so happy to sit down with you and have this conversation about your
Thank you.
career. But we always end these interviews with a question kind of like this, which is, what advice do you have for young people that are interested in your line of work? Very broad question. Answer
It's
it.
not for everyone. The first advice I give is get some real world experience. I mean, I think, the fact that I've been in the public sector, I work with the private sector, I'm out in the world is just really important, because you'll learn different personality skills. And for my field, I think the most important personality attribute is to not take anything personal. When bad things happen to communities, institutions, corporations, individuals, they're scared, they are often angry. Things are said, expressed, things are done because of that fear and because sometimes of that anger. If you take things personally, you will lose the storyline. I mean, if you want to be in this field, you want to help people get to less bad, to understand that there will be a better day, right? That things will get better. And I think it's really important that you sort of have to learn to step outside yourself. My husband, going back to security mom, my husband, who's known me a very long time, said the only way I'm able to do what I do is I was born without what he calls the stew gene. I mean, in other words, I don't stew, either as a mother or as a professional. Sometimes you just have to make decisions with imperfect information and be willing to adapt if that decision needs to be changed or modified or course corrected. And that's the skill that is knowable and teachable and accessible to everyone. I often say, people always say, well, what's crisis leadership, right? There's no such thing as crisis leadership. There are leaders who find themselves in a crisis. And that's all of us. That's everyone. So that's what I try to do.
Excellent, excellent advice. Now, that will conclude our conversation with Juliette Kayyem. Juliette, thank you again for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening, everybody.